relevant to your beach operations and management. At the same time, we hope to also hear from you about coastal issues that you may be facing at the state parks that you manage on a day-to-day basis. This meeting is meant to be relatively informal, and we encourage questions and discussions on the information presented. Our speaker today is Bill O'Reilly. Bill's research has focused on combining wave models and field measurements to better understand regional nearshore wave climate and sediment transport. He's also the lead author of our annual beach report. Most importantly, Bill loves to share what he has learned. So I pass it over to you, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And with that, I will attempt to share my screen. And there it is, sharing. Continue to share. So you're seeing my presentation window, yes?
Yes.
Good, okay. So yeah, today I thought we sent out kind of two newsletters together, so we'll break up our discussion today kind of around those two things. So first I'll talk a little about the sand maps we make with our jet ski surveys for the southern half of North County, and because I like to show them because they're interesting. And then I'll show you some plots, just some very general plots about the Encinitas and Solana beach nourishments, how we're tracking those and kind of where they're at. And then I'm going to throw in a little thing about the Bataquitos dredging that's either just starting to happen or is about to happen, is a way to kind of strike up a little conversation about how we might better coordinate in the future and how these things operate. And then we'll take a break there for some questions. And then I'm going to talk about this new paper that we just published in Nature about satellite shoreline change in California that surprised us. Maybe it'll surprise you. I know some people on the call maybe have seen little bits and pieces of this, but I'll kind of talk about what I think it means for coastline management, and then we'll have more questions. All right, so sand maps, one of my favorite topics. So yes, for many years now, we've been doing jet ski surveys between the Scripps Submarine Canyon at Black's Beach up to Cardiff, San Elio State Beach. And so we're starting to gain an understanding of what the sand is up to as it moves through the system towards the submarine canyon. And one of the big things we've learned, for a long time, we've had a wave prediction model that says that the transport, the river of sand, if you will, from right to left in this plot, may be slow, kind of right around the lagoons, to the south of the lagoons, because the waves change their angle in approaching the coastline, and the coastline itself changes angle a little bit, and those combine to potentially kind of make the alongshore transport pretty slow in those zones. And but one of the other things that we've realized is these reef structures that are also associated with these reversal areas with the waves are also seemingly playing a pretty significant role as we watch the sand try to move through them in our jet ski surveys. So this is a picture I want you to have, is that we actually have this alternating sandy region, reefy region, sandy region. The reefs stick out from the coastal bluffs, and then the sandy regions are in the low-lying coastal lagoon areas. And so we have that go back and forth. And it turns out those reefy sections, the wave cut platform, bedrock platform, is slightly elevated compared to the sandy regions. So the sand physically has to go to a higher elevation. Not only does it have to make its way through the rocks, but it actually has to go to a higher elevation and over to the next one. And so when we overlay sand map anomalies, so comparing the current elevation of the sand out there relative to the long-term means for different times of years, we start to see this sandy, reefy kind of characteristic show up. So this was the one I sent out in the newsletter. This was our relative anomalies, high and low, high in blue, low in red elevations for the summertime in our jet ski surveys historically, how we were doing this summer. And I noted that we have a fair amount of bonus sand in North Torrey, in the sandy region in North Torrey Pines, and less sand than usual in South Torrey. And we have our reef in between. And Del Mar is some sort of mix of more sand and less sand. Solana is full of sand, and Cardiff is quite low relative to its long-term mean. Although Cardiff's mean is higher, tends to be higher than the rest of them because of all the sand placements that happened in Cardiff in 2000, between 2000 and 2020. Um, uh, but the, yeah, the interesting thing to me is that how much the sand likes to collect in the sandy areas and how obstruction-like the reefy ones are. It's pretty pixelated because we're running our jet ski at 100-meter spacing along shore through these complicated reef structures, so it doesn't look that pretty in a way. But nevertheless, the blues and reds generally capture where there's more sand or less sand than usual. So this was summertime. This is the anomaly. And this is what the latest one said since the newsletter. This was our fall survey and how the current fall conditions compared to the long-term average in the fall. And you can see that blue area that we had off of Torrey Pines actually advanced shoreward. And so now we have a whole lot of sand in the near shore in North Torrey Pines going up into South Del Mar. We have a ton of sand in the near shore, of course, at Solana Beach where they put the nourishment in, and that has been migrating into North Del Mar. I'll show you that in a minute. And yeah, so those are kind of the big things. But this South Torrey being kind of starved of sand and North Torrey having more sand than normal is persisting through this time period. And so we've been looking at this as sort of the river of sand is a bit backed up here, that it's kind of gotten hung up in North Torrey. And so South Torrey is actually a little sand starved at the moment, presumably over time with bigger winter wave events or bigger winters in general that will start to make its way through. But with these underwater surveys, we basically can kind of see what's going on and see how the river of sand is sort of more episodic in its behavior and more isolated as the sand tries to move between the reefs into these sandy areas. So one of the interesting things I would think for the people that are managing Penasquitos Inlet is that there's a lot of sand around in North Torrey right now. I don't know how that's impacting the inlet, but certainly makes me nervous looking. But one of the things we want to keep in mind, we don't think that this is sand from the Solana nourishment, that this sort of extra, unusually large amounts of sand in North Torrey and South Del Mar actually started appearing before the nourishment went in and has been persisting here a little bit. So we think that this sand is separate from that. But if that's not what other people are experiencing out there in the field, well, we're interested in talking to you about that. So I'm going to talk a little about why, well, not exactly why we think this is different, but you'll see in my next plot as I talk about Solana Beach nourishment, why we think in some ways that separate sand now in front of Torrey. So here's a plot of the Solana Beach nourishment area. That's along here on the right-hand side in Fletcher Cove. We have San Dieguito Inlet here, Del Mar down to 25th Street, and then down to Powerhouse Park before the cliffs start up again. The solid line here is the beach width from our fall 2024 survey, so last year. I'm sorry, the 2023 survey. So this was before the nourishment went in. The nourishment went in early 2024, January through March of 2024. And this is fall. The dashed line now is fall 2024. So that was still last year's fall survey. So, but it was after the nourishment. Nourishment had been in for a while. And we can see that the beach is much wider. That's good. Plus 40 meters or so. But see, then we had this stuff over here. And we believe that this was natural beach widening. Like I said, we started to see this happening before the nourishment even went in. So we don't think that this over here is related to this over here. Okay, so this is through fall, last year's fall. And let's overlay now this year's fall and do another change. And so now this year, our fall 2025 is the little dotted line here. Okay, and so relative to last fall's dashed line, so now we're starting to see the nourishment pad lose some of its width, in about 15 meters roughly on average across there. And we've seen this gain here in North Del Mar, which we've also been tracking by doing sand sampling. Um, so it looks like right now that the nourishment has migrated down to maybe about 25th Street. Um, and there's a lot of sand around the inlet. It's remaining open. It's pinned against the south side of the Dog Beach area here against the riprap of the home that's on that north side. But at least up till now, it's holding its own and staying open. So roughly the sand so far has migrated about a kilometer down the coastline. Again, if there are people that are familiar with this and think they maybe have seen something different, we'd be really interested in, talking to you about that. So same concept, but let's go up to the other nourishment. This was the one that was done at Moonlight State Beach. Um, Same concept again. The solid line is the pre-nourishment, and then the dashed line is the post one in the fall. And you can see that this is quite a bit different than what I was just showing you at Solana Beach. Is that so? Yeah, we've had the gain with the nourishment, woohoo, which is basically between these dotted lines here. But there's been a whole lot of widening down here. And we do think this is nourishment migration sand that has caused this widening. And one of the things was that because were putting these in the wintertime, and this was true at Solana as well, some of the sand started moving very quickly. It just never really consolidated, on the fill, on the pad. And it was wintertime. And this section of coastline in our modeling has pretty brisk down coast transport. And sure enough, the sand seemed to be on the move. And so even by just 2024, so this is somewhat, 8 months after the nourishment went in, a lot of movement down the coast. We'll do the same thing. Now we'll add in our recent fall survey. So that's a small dotted line here. And we can see that now that the nourishment area has, like Solana, has lost some of its width, particularly on the north side. And that's what's been really interesting up at Encinitas is that although we're starting to see this happen a little at Solana, but Encinitas in particular, and it makes sense. So the whole thing's trying to move south, but the north end doesn't have any other sand coming like to feed it, right? So the north end just sort of falls apart, but now it's passing through the rest of the pad. And so even as that is passing sand to the south, it's getting sand from the north from the other part of the pad. So this is not unexpected that the pad will kind of come apart from its north end and then travel southward as it moves. We can see that there's been a little more of a plus up here, nourishment migration widening compared to the previous year, but it's not really standing out maybe in the way that we saw at Solana in that regard. But Santa Leo is still widening. When we look at annual mean beach widths rather than just the fall ones, the extra bonus width at Santa Leo State Beach really stands out. And what that means is that it's winter time. That sand that came through really helped it prevent it from getting really narrow in the wintertime. And now it got even a little more extra the summertime. So its annual average really went up quite a bit. So that's kind of nice. And it has traveled about 2.5 kilometers. So it's traveled quite a bit farther than the Solana Beach nourishment has. And that makes sense to us just in a very general sense because the longshore transport predictions here are quite a bit stronger than Solana Beach. So this is beach width, so that's one way to look at it. But beach width and beach volume are not a one-to-one kind of thing. And you could think about that as when they especially a beach that has a lot of sand. So when it comes in the summertime and it builds out its terrace, at some point it doesn't get that much wider, but it's throwing it gets higher. So it's basically building a terrace on top. And so the beach width starts to slow down in terms of it getting wider, but the volume actually keeps going up quite a bit. And so they aren't quite completely in sync. And so here's a version of what I put in the plot I put in the newsletter. So this does not go up completely to right now. So it goes up to a little earlier in September, but it's trying to show the same thing, but in terms of volume. And so we have the solid line here is 2023. This is before the survey or before the nourishment went in. And then the light blue line is 16 April. So this was pretty close to post-nourishment. So, and And so what we see here is that was the nourishment pad coming around here. And we see on this side it had broken down a little bit. And in fact, but at this point, not much sand had traveled down the coast yet. Um, and then here we are, 11 September 2025. That's the dotted line. And now we can see a bunch of sand has been added down here. Um, so when you do the math on it, so the whole nourishment volume was 340,000 cubic yards. Not all of that was subaerial sand, of course, that it had to have a footing. And so some of that was subaqueous. And so now we account for about 243,000 cubic yards subaerial on the beach. And we may be missing some that went all the way down into San Elijo here. So it's not surprising. This is a smaller number. In terms of the pad loss itself, we have something like 33,000 cubic yards from the pad itself. So that's what I kind of want to present about the nourishments. But one interesting thing is that, so you'll notice that Leucadia State Beach, so this thing is moving south for the most part, like right after the nourishment there's been a little bit of gain here and that kind of is poking into Leucadia State Beach. But the thing is really moving south, and that should be expected in this area. This is not a northward transport area. So Leucadia State Beach, we don't think is going to benefit much from this nourishment. San Elijo is going to benefit the most, then into Cardiff. But another thing that's going on that I thought I would bring up is that they are doing some work up at Bataquitos. This is through Sandag, I believe, that they're doing a double rail of the railroad tracks through here, replacement to make things work better with the train. And as part of that, they're doing some dredging in here for the construction work. And Sandag has arranged for them to place that sand on South Ponto Beach. And the stuff I read this year, maybe 10,000 cubic yards is going to go in, and then maybe 10,000 a year for a few more years as they do it, which is great. I love these small feedings of the beach. I think that that's a great way to go. They're placing it in the wintertime, which I also think if the intention is to try to bypass and feed it down the beaches, that's kind of a good strategy too, because the wintertime waves are going to be more likely to move it to southward. But they're placing it in Ponto as far as I understand. And I think that this might be where there's a disconnect. I don't know if the intention of this is to hopefully feed Leucadia State Beach or not. But if it is, at least our modeling, our hypothesis, if you will, suggests that it may struggle to get down there in any reasonable amount of time. And it's perhaps just equally likely to get fed back into the Bataquitos Lagoon if it's placed in this area. So our modeling where we look at the net transport every year that the models think where things are going to go, it has this reversal area by the lagoon. And so it says that if you are north of MOP 758 near Grandview in our system, yes, that the net annual transport tends to be to the north. And that doesn't mean that it never moves south. Of course, it does during big storms. But overall, it's kind of a northward transport zone. And so placing it here, even in the wintertime, may not lead to it getting down into Leucadia State Beach, if that's where they want it to go. But if you get south, once you get past here, Grandview, then things really start to pick up. It should be a strong southward transport thing. So in a perfect world, if the goal was to take that sand and feed Leucadia State Beach, which is pretty sand starved, you'd want to put it down closer to Grandview. I don't know. There are probably all sorts of logistical issues with trying to do something like that. But I don't think that, to my knowledge, it kind of never came up as a discussion of, where should we put the sand or what is the goal for it? So I just bring this up as sort of a conversational piece for us. It just becomes one more test case. So this will be interesting. It's not a ton amount of sand, and the way they put it down, it may kind of, not move around as one big mass, but we do truck LiDAR surveys up there pretty much weekly through this area. And so hopefully we'll kind of see what it does. We'll be able to track it at least a little bit and see if it actually does try to come south. It is quite possible, like I say, that our modeling is much more of a hypothesis than a smoking gun at this point. And so we will watch it with interest, whatever they decide to do. But because it's for multiple years, it might be something worth talking about the possibility of placing some farther down to feed Leucadia State Beach. And with that, we're going to pause and see if anybody has any questions or anything to say about what I've talked about so far.
I do, Bill. I got a quick question, or not question, but just to comment on the last thing. The sounds like Sandag's putting sand exactly how you described in the near shore, and I think they're using the city of Encinitas's scoop permit receptor site. So was the easiest thing to permit for the Bataquitos rail project sand to go to. And Carrie Benner's online here, so she probably knows this better than I do. But I think it's pretty small increments they're planning on moving across, like maybe even a couple thousand at a time. And they're not exactly sure how much is coming. But I think the intention of it going into that, I mean, I think the first thing was just the ease of permitting. That city scoop permit makes it a little easier, but also the intention was to put a little sand on, Grandview and Leucadia from that direction. But it'll be interesting to see. I didn't realize there was sort of a northward pattern there, so that might end up back on Ponto Beach or maybe back in the Bataquitos Inlet before.
Yes, that is, yeah. There is circumstantial evidence that, that Bataquitos just likes to hold on to its sand for the most part in that area, and that it really takes a significant, El Nino-like winter to, to try to get sand passed down towards Grandview. But that is circumstantial at this point. But yeah, you can see what's happening here with the coastline. So there's a bunch of sand offshore, more like geologic time, sediment fans offshore, and those tend to bend the waves around. And so the waves are more shore normal south of the lagoons. So they're attacking more at a north to south angle here, and then they're more shore normal here because they've bent over this thing offshore. And if you look at the coastline here, how it straightens out and then bends back, this sort of like gentle crescent, that happens all along our coastline as we hit the lagoons, come off a bluff and hit a lagoon. And the shore normal here basically faces more into the wave field. And all of those things theoretically kill the alongshore transport. And so whether that's really true or if that's overcome by other things going on, we don't really know. But yes, when I saw this, I started to look around. It's like, oh, where do we see the reversal in our model? And it's not until you get to Grandview, and it's actually quite strong. The northward lakes the model really does not want to send sand to the south that often in this zone, and so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if we can track it with the truck when you put in small increments, like how long it kind of stays around on the beach in a way that we can see it. Because it tends to be fairly sand starved south of there, we might get to see it when it moves, because we don't have much else to see there.
Bill,
yeah,
are you getting those volumes, or will you be getting those volumes from Sandag, or do you need them to come from us?
But yeah, no, we haven't. I'll talk to Keith
Okay.
about it. But yeah, we certainly would like to know what their numbers are as they do it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for tracking that. This has been an ongoing conversation between us and Sandag and the city of Encinitas and the city of Carlsbad. All of us, each having our own goals with what to do with the sand here. So it's really helpful to have this insight. And Darren had it totally correct that their sand placement is motivated by the permit. So they're just working within the existing placement footprint. We would prefer to have more sand on South Ponto, either north or south or north of the jetties at Bataquitos Lagoon, because people just are constantly complaining about the dominant cobble there. And then, of course, CDFW, which manages Bataquitos Lagoon, they were hoping to do their own dredge of the lagoon, but they are out of funding, so they're not doing that this fall. And they're looking into options of how to do that in the future, and it's not looking great. So they're trying to coordinate with the cities and us and Sandag to get that going. So this is a great time to start coordinating with your team, just to try to optimize all of this effort, you know, as we're all looking into how to get the sand out of the lagoon and back on the beach and where we should put it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this it's a general thing. If it turns out to be true or like somewhat true that, you know, and a lot of places have reef structures also south of the lagoon. That reefy thing I was showing you, you go sandy, you go reefy, and the waves aren't in a big hurry to move the way. That it all kind of points to really kind of if you want to bypass, it may turn out that you really got to like move the sand an order of a kilometer down the coast would be ideal before you place it in order to give it a fighting chance to start moving. But you know, that's got to be more expensive, if even doable in some kind of things. But just looking down the road in terms of trying to manage the inlets, having an engineering solution or a financially feasible way to, uh, you know, kind of go, we can move it a kilometer. It's not that big of a deal. You know, we can do that within the way we do things. Uh, that could prove down the road to be like a really advantageous thing. But I don't know what all the engineering challenges are with that sort of thing.
Do you think, I mean, this is the trouble. This is, it seems like, well, maybe we should just pile it up right there in that location and wait for an El Nino year to drag it down the coast. But problem is in the meantime, it's probably pouring right back into the inlet. So,
Yes, yes. I mean, if you know, if the model's sort of correct, it's saying that we're spending a lot of time recycling sand around lagoons. You know, we move it out and we think it's gonna move off the south, and it does not. And it ends up just coming back in. And um, yeah, so strategies for moving it a little farther down the coastline when we do this. But certainly doing it in the wintertime, I think helps. I know it's a little weird because we'd like it on the beach for people to use in the summertime. But if you want it to move down coast, that's a slightly different goal. And wintertime, and we saw with the Encinitas nourishment when they were putting the sand in and it wasn't consolidated yet in the wintertime, holy smokes, can that stuff move, right? And so you could even imagine down the road of just, yeah, feeding the beach when a storm is about to come or something like that with the absolute intention to get it to push that sand farther down the coast. Any other thoughts or questions on anything so far? Okay, we'll take that as a no. So we'll go on to part two. How are we doing? Oh, that's pretty good timing, isn't it? Okay. All right. So in the second half, I want to talk about this paper that we just published, or just the parts of it that I think we hope coastal managers like think about and grasp. Um, and to do that, so I'm just going to really talk about one figure that's in the paper, and then I'm going to relate it to Emma Wood State Beach, which I've decided is our poster child for everything in this plot. Okay, so in the paper, we took COSAT satellite data. So we worked in the end with Killian Voss, who was at the University of New South Wales and led the whole program to develop this COSAT data. So these are Landsat satellites that have been up really since the 70s, but since 1984 or so, they were producing images that one can actually try to extract a shoreline, a wetted shoreline from. And so they made this amazing data set that's online. COSAT, there are other satellite data sets out there as well, but this was one of the first and biggest and most public ones. And so it included the California coastline. And the USGS worked with Killian on this quite a bit, and they published some really nice papers around this, including Sean Vatusik and John Warwick has been publishing a lot about it lately. So we were looking at it as well, and we started because we were just interested in validating it against all our beach surveys down here. We have 20 years worth of surveys, and we were kind of like, well, what's in here? So, how does that shoreline match with ours? And when we did that, the big thing we first realized is that we averaged this coastline, these shorelines down, they're quite noisy, individual ones. There's a lot of scatter, as you might imagine, trying to turn a wetted line into an actual shoreline consistent position of some kind. I would have given up on the project myself, but they stuck with it and produced this data set. And when you average it down to yearly values, so a yearly shoreline position, so that's a lot of averaging. They're typically, 3 or 4 images per month these days. Back then, maybe 2 or 3, and at the beginning. But when you average these down to annual shoreline positions, it really starts to match our survey data, also averaged down to annual shoreline position. Then they really start to match really well. So you've basically averaged out all the seasonal weirdness of higher run up on the beach in the winter than the summer, blah, blah, blah. And you've basically taken most of that out of the equation. And what you're left with is this really cool interannual. So 1 dot per year. So we turned 37 years worth of their data, which is typically like hundreds of points. We reduced to 37 points. So for the 37 years. But those time series matched our time series really well. And when we started looking at the whole coastline that way, some really interesting things popped out. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. So this is a left-hand map of the California coastline. So there were 8,600 some 100-meter spaced coastsat transects that were done all along here. 4 of the reaches that had sand or cobble seemed to be mobile beaches. That's what they chose. So they're skipping over rocky bluff areas and things like that. So it's not the entire coastline, but it's, of our coastline, it's like 860 kilometers or something that moves around. And so that's what we start with. And now we've reduced these to annual values. So we have a 37-year record at each of the transects. And what you see in that, and USGS also saw this much earlier on and published the general idea, is that you see these alternating, widening, and narrowing reaches of the beach as you go along the coastline. So one part is getting narrower, one part is getting wider, long-term across the 37-year record, which was kind of like, whoa, right from the beginning when they found that. But now when we've kind of put it down to these annual averages and started looking at statewide averages of that, it even gets more crazy in that, and that's what's up here. This is the average for the entire state, is that black line in here of this annual average from year to year going through. And so it's all done in relative terms. So, beach width varies by back beach or whatever. So what you do is you have this long time series, you take out the mean, and now you're just doing like an anomaly thing. So the change relative to the mean. And so if you do that for all the transects and add them all up across the state, you get this black line. And then we're like, whoa, that's pretty amazing because it just keeps going back and forth and there's no trend in it. And then we separated, well, what about just the Southern California versus Northern California? And that was also shocking that they were tracking very closely with each other all the way through. And in fact, if you make a version of this where you're just doing a difference plot from year to year, so where they drift apart here, if you do a difference plot, the difference from year to year, that doesn't affect that much. They really look the same. So Southern California, yearly change from year to year in the shoreline in this data set were like on top of each other for the 37 years for the most part. And it was like, wow, is that really true? I mean, is the whole coastline like operating, in a coherent way like that? And the answer seems to be it's at least half true, or at least half the variance of the record as a whole is kind of described by that plot that I've been showing you up here. Okay, so that was the first shocker to us that there was so much coherent behavior going on along the state, and the fact that we thought it would go downhill. We thought after El Niños we wouldn't get back to where we were. We assumed that we were losing sand overall on average on the California coastline because we've dammed our rivers and engineered everything and have protecting the bluffs, and that we were just kind of cutting off some of the historical sand supply, and so we just thought we were heading downhill, or we would see that. but that does not show up in this 37-year satellite record. So that shocked us as well. But what does show up, and even more dramatically, and kind of puts an exclamation mark on what Sean Vatusik found with the USGS, is these shoreline rotations are really something, and they are a big story of what's really been happening on the coastline. And for those that have experienced the coast as being an eroding coastline, well, it's true, like half of the coastline has been eroding, but the flip side of that is half of it has also been accreting, which we haven't been noticing or appreciating so much. And not only has it been doing that, but it's wild. So if you take all these transects and you go, okay, each of these transects along here, I'm just going to, based on its where it was in 2021 versus 1985, I'm going to declare whether it's gotten wider or narrower. So you split them up by that. It turns out when you split them up by that, it's almost exactly half and half. So of the 86, 100 of them or whatever, there's 4,200 to 1, 4,000, they're like very close. Now, in this time series, we conveniently, by 2021, just because that's happened when they made this data set where they stopped, we were conveniently back to go. That you could imagine if they had stopped in 2014, it would have been a different story. We would have thought beaches were widening or something like that. But since things had gone back to go, the collection of beaches that are transects that are widening versus narrowing make this incredibly symmetric distribution. So a symmetric distribution of winners and losers along the coastline. And that's what's being shown down here in this lower plot, where we've separated the two out and we do the same calculation just with our statewide black thing. And oh, now you see that the game is on. And particularly since 1998. So you can see, so these are the same group of transects. They tried to separate before, but then after the 98, they all agreed that they were all just beat up and narrow here. But since then, they've done it again and they've kept going. So we have this trend in widening and narrowing beaches here. And this, in many ways, while our paper really is about this amazing coherent behavior, as a management point of view, what we've done is we've helped isolate. This is cross-shore transport, we believe, and this is long-shore transport. And so we've been able to separate the two. And we go, oh, this is a really impressive cross-shore signal that keeps going, and we can't find a trend in it. And it's like, oh, but the longshore thing, slowly each year, even though the cross-shore, on a year-to-year basis, the cross-shore signal is actually dominant, there's a little bit of longshore happening every year. And over time, that has caused our beaches to rotate and for people to experience very, serious erosion, or people quietly enjoying their much wider beach. So Emma Wood is like a really cool one to kind of put this. So this narrowing and widening, sure, across the whole state or whatever, but this plot is showing that this is happening on much smaller scales. This is basically the sum of many beach reaches doing some kind of similar thing like this, that they're having some rotation involved with them, some wins and losses. And Emma Wood turns out to be kind of a great example of this. So I'll show you that. So especially, I think, so Emma Wood's like tucked back up in here or something. So it's not even, it's a place like you would think that would just completely have its own life, its own beach life. It's tucked back into the Santa Barbara Channel, more south facing than west facing kind of thing. And it's like, why would that behave like the rest of the beaches on the coastline? And well, it does. So here's Emma Wood State Beach here, and on the right-hand side, and these are all the COSAT transects. So they're all, and so I just color coded them so you could keep track of their time series. And so blue at the southeast end, up to red at the northwest end. And so then if you just start from go with them, again, we're all doing this in a relative world. And so we just start them all at 0 in 1985 and do the change. We can see that the south end has gotten quite a bit narrower and the north end has gotten quite a bit wider. But their average, their mean and the median here in the middle really hasn't changed that much. And in fact, because these signals are so large, if I'm going to jump back here so this is like 30 meters, 20 meters, so they have like really spread out. So if I jump back to my plot here, see that's contributing to this wide distribution here. Like, so we have many, many beaches basically trying to contribute to this histogram, even though a ton of them, a ton of transects, haven't changed that much. So they're more towards, you could say, towards the center of these rotations. And I think Emma Wood, not all of them are having this big of a wide of a swing. That's why I call it a poster child for this, that it's had a pretty dramatic swing. It's held on to its overall shoreline, mean. And because of the scale here, but if we really just zoomed in and I just plotted this plaque line here, like if brought that out and plotted it, it would trace a lot like this. Not as high in amplitude, or probably not as high, but it's more or less following this pattern here, the statewide pattern. But in this case, it's masked somewhat by the fact of the strong rotation when you look at the data this way. So that's kind of the remarkable thing going on. At least we think that we're not seeing some huge loss in sand from the system that would be reflected in the shoreline trending down significantly since 1985. And it highlights from a management purpose, it's like, why does everybody feel like we're losing the coastline? And it's primarily because of this rotation thing going on. But that brings up the question of like, well, why is it doing this? And so the answer is, well, we don't know all the answers to that. But the work by Oregon State, this was Dylan Anderson. So this was, I think, his PhD thesis up at Oregon State. They noticed this pre-satellite stuff coming out. They have very long beaches up there, and they had been surveying them much like we did for many years. And they noticed a beach rotation, that the north ends of their beaches were getting wider and the south end was getting narrower. And so they've linked it. They feel like it's a PDO thing, if I understand, all their arguments, and that so the balance changed between waves coming from more southerly directions and northerly directions, southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere, whatever. And so with that, they've had, I guess, stronger northern current longshore transport than they had previously, and that forced rotation. So that's got to be part of this too as well. Some of our beaches don't rotate south to north, like they can rotate other directions. In the Southern California Bight, we know that local seas are very important. Local seas are very important in driving the longshore currents and sediment transport. And so maybe we don't know if there are also some things that have happened with our local seas that have changed as well, particularly some of these very sheltered sites that you wouldn't think would care too much about, perhaps, changes in North Pacific and South Pacific swell so much. So it remains a bit of a mystery at this point of why this is occurring, and whether it's going to turn around and go back the other way, which would be nice, but we just don't know. We just don't know at this point what's going to happen with this. But these two things are kind of the story. And it has all sorts of implications when you think about it. So this is kind of saying that, it just may or may not be true, but what's consistent with this is that sand hasn't been leaving the system in large amounts. And so certainly we know it goes down submarine canyons because we measure it. But we also thought that we may be losing a fair amount of sand in the cross shore. Really big winters take sand so far offshore that it's basically past the old depth of closure and can never make it back. And so we just assumed, especially with the more active El Niños we've had in the last few decades, that this was like beyond what the system normally could handle. And so that stuff was gone. The satellite data does not support that thinking at all. In fact, it says like, oh, it may take a while, but we can come back. And in fact, if conditions are right, I mean, look at this over here. From 2010, we were down kind of tagged with our lowest that we've been in terms of shoreline. And a couple years later, we're up at the highest in the whole record over a course of 3 or 4 years. So the recovery period from 2010 to 2016 was spectacular across the state. Across the state, it was spectacular. And so it's like, what the heck was it about, the wave conditions that led that to happen? But what it does show is that, the sand can come back, and it's like seasonal change, but it's an interannual version of some kind of You can think of it as a very deep bar being placed offshore and taking multiple years to get back to the coastline. So it's operating at this more like ENSO time scale versus our regular seasonal time scale with the bars. So that, I mean, it changes a lot of things when you think about how to manage the coastline. That it's like, oh, the sand is around. It has this pattern to it, like, and it's much more resilient than we thought it is. But we have this huge problem of the fact that all our beaches are rotating. And so it's not so much that the sand may be offshore, it's down the coastline somewhere else. And it would be consistent with the fact that, we are having trouble finding deposits of native grain size, the native grain size for the beaches in different areas. We're having trouble finding deposits of those offshore where we thought they would be lurking after being ripped offshore by terrible El Niños. And we're really not, up to this point, not finding. We find coarser sand offshore. So that also is at least consistent with this. This is saying that, oh no, that native, all the good native sand is actually staying close to the shoreline because it's the most effective at getting back to the beach. And so you're not going to find it offshore. You're going to find it down the coastline from where you are right now in many circumstances. And so that may require, us changing some strategies. It certainly makes the fact that we're using this kind of coarser, twice the grain size stuff, like at the Solana nourishments, even to us, like more important to understand that because as a solution, when we want to go offshore to get some sand is our best solution, we have to expect that it's probably not going to be the native grain size. And so understanding how it's going to behave and how long it's going to last and where it's going to go just seems doubly important at that point. All right. I talked a lot. We have 10 more minutes to chat. I had a few other things to show, but okay. I'll show this thing very quickly just because it is the cool part of the paper. It's a science paper. It's not a management paper. It has management implications, but we were doing this for the science part of it. So that's the whole thing. We were like, oh, okay, the beach is going up and down, in a coherent way. Well, what's driving this? It had to be the wave field. It had to be the offshore wave field. It had to be the offshore wave field across all of California. And it turns out that it's the wave power anomalies. So just like we had turned the shoreline stuff into anomalies by taking out its mean, if you do the same thing with wave power offshore, an inverse pattern shows up. So when we have anomalously high waves offshore, we have beach retreat, and when we have anomalously low, we have recovery for the most. It's really a change from year to year that it's reacting to in both cases most strongly. But just kind of as a general rule, positive anomalies in wave power are going to cause negative anomalies in the shoreline. And so we work with Laura Conjugal from Spain, who does a lot of this Estella stuff, where they look at the source region, they backtrack from the coastline to offshore to see where the stuff came from. And so what she found is that when we were having, so like the top 25% of times when overall the beaches were eroding in California, it came with a big positive anomaly in wave power right out here in the central North Pacific. So this magic zone here. When this gets hot, when this goes up, the whole state reacts to it. Okay. When that's lower, so when we have a negative anomaly out there, so when the lower 25% or when we were recovering the best in our record, it's associated with low wave power out here. So this one area of the power anomaly going up and down drives all of this along the California coastline. So that's pretty cool. It's apparently a difficult place to predict what's going to go on out here in terms of the winds, statistically speaking. But that is the question. If we can forecast if we're going to have higher or low or winds essentially out here directed towards California, then we could forecast what's going to happen at the beach. Okay, I'm done talking. The San Diego Beach Report is live. And so if you go to our Coastal Processes group under Data Products, San Diego Beach Report, you can go and look at our regular stuff that we put out. And if you haven't done it before, when you go to it, there's a little guide. If you click in when you get to the beach report, if you go to the glide up, there's a little story map in there. It gives you the kind of background about how we measure and then how we turn that into the numbers and the plots in the beach report. So it's really helpful to kind of appreciate what's is or isn't in the beach report by looking at the guide first. Okay, thanks. We have a few minutes to discuss. Darren has his hand up.
I always have my hand up. I was just pausing to, I have a question until everybody else gets theirs ready. But, so for the gainers and the losers up and down the state, are those are not necessarily the same location as gaining and losing, or no, or the same location. It's just that the number of gainers and losers are about the same up and down the coast.
Yes,
Right.
statistically, when you you add it all up.
So we don't, so collecting information about the characteristics of the gainer or loser transect isn't necessarily meaningful with that data.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I guess
Rephrase
because
that.
they're 1 year a beach is gaining and 1 year it's losing, but it's kind of consistent. Like you couldn't collect data on each one of those transects and say this one's south facing with a half seawall urbanized area versus this one's north facing with a natural sandy bluff above it, and kind of categorize all those transects and then look into how that's affecting
how that falls. Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I think things would be done like that.
Yeah.
The USGS has been looking, they've been looking at these rotations. I mean, because they originally worked up this data with their Australian colleagues. And so they've been kind of looking at these rotations for a while. I think the thing that our paper added to that is that I don't think they had tried to do these big statewide and regional averages, and they have been pretty focused on the seasonal change in the data as well. And but they've been thinking about these rotations, the long-short transport associated with them for a while now. So they probably have more thoughts and ideas, and maybe have done some of the things like you've just discussed there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought I would just pop in for our state parks folks and flag that there's also been kind of a derivative study that we've been working on in a paper now in review that is using this data set to look at these trends specific to all coastal units of the state park system. So, has trends for every park unit, both for this kind of shoreline change as well as cliff erosion from a separate data set that Adam has worked on. And then also, that figure for Emma Woods, which showed kind of the individual transects and where we were accreting versus eroding. There are similar figures to that are in draft form for all coastal units of the state park system. So if you want to kind of explore things right on kind of park by park trends, that those are kind of all products that are under development by Bill and Adam and the folks at Scripps, and should kind of be getting rolled out hopefully sooner rather than later.
I see Jeff Crooks.
Yeah, thanks. Just quick comment and question. First, the comment is thanks for sharing the information on that paper you guys just studied, published. That's really, really cool stuff. And part of it is I'm wondering about, I know they're super complicated, but the inlet conditions and there's been a lot of work thinking about wave power and its effect on inlets and things like that. So, that's not a question per se, but just something I've been interested in and thinking about the tidal prism and how much sediment's getting pushed into and out of these systems. But I guess my question, well, I guess is a comment too, is that I work primarily down at the T1 estuary, although we do a lot of the monitoring in Penasquitos Lagoon and things like that as well. And I think I've highlighted this before and we've talked with Nick, but there's a lot of interest in the Borderfield South area. And I don't believe that's being sampled now. Is that the case? The stuff down at the estuary is primarily north of the river mouth. Is that right?
In terms of the truck surveys?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if Adam is still on, if he could answer that, but they do survey at least, I think, twice a year down there. at least.
At
Um,
at the at Borderfield?
yeah,
Warfield South, like going in. I know it's a pain in the butt to get down there, and we've talked about this, in general before.
We're doing that, sir. We're surveying that area once a month.
yeah,
Oh, okay. So you are doing the. Okay, great. Because I
yeah.
looked at the report, I didn't see the
You're right, Jeff, that I noticed that too, is that for some reason, so, a lot of the beach report code has been set up to grind through these data sets as they come in or whatever, but it's not, for some reason, it doesn't like, it doesn't like that section down there. I think the problem might be that just the way our map system is set up, where our back beach points are down there, they're not actually properly placed with where the back beach is. So I think it may be getting confused and deciding that it doesn't have good data or something, but I'll work on that. I will clean up the border field part of the report, and I'll send you a note when I think it's better.
Yeah, that'd be great. And we appreciate getting down there. And well, partly in general, right? It's an area of interest, but I mentioned this before, and it's hopefully going to become real. We have a significant chunk of money from California Coastal Conservancy, but also NOAA has pitched into this. And we're to do a salt marsh restoration that's going to generate several 100,000 cubic yards of sediment. And we want to put as much material as we can on the beach. And that'll probably happen within a year or so.
Okay.
So we're working with the DMMT, the Dredge Materials Management Team, about what can go on the beach. We're following up on a study um, that Jonathan Warwick, which you mentioned before, had done, and looking at possibly putting smaller grain size material that's typically allowed on the beach. But that might happen within the next year or so, is putting that material on the beach. And as part of this, we just got some funding from NOAA to do some dune enhancement work, because we're one of the few places that has dunes adjacent, dunes period, but
Yeah.
like sort of natural dunes adjacent to a beach. So we're going to work with Hani's group and others to do some dune. The idea is not to build dunes by dumping a bunch of sand on the beach. The idea is to build dunes by dumping sand on the dunes, because the dunes are already functioning. The idea is to put material on the beach and then enhance the processes that build dunes by sand fencing or seeding and planting native plants and things like that. So there's going to be a big focus on this area within, probably honey stuff may start within the next few months, actually, to start putting the dune trapping measures in place, building on a study they did a few years ago. But then the major placements of material will probably occur within a year or so. And actually we don't have, oh, I'm spending all the time here, sorry, but I don't know if we know exactly how we're going to put that material on the beach, whether it's like as the trucks, like daily spread it out along the beach, stockpiling and try and put it out all at once. I think all of that stuff is to be figured out. Um, but there's a potential for a fair bit of material to end up on the beach.
That's good to know. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Okay. We'll clean up that part of the report for you.
Yeah. That's just I thought it was happening based on previous discussions.
Yes. No, I noticed the same thing. I was like, I thought we had more data down there. Why isn't it showing up?
Okay, cool.
So, all right.
Yeah, and I look forward to reading that paper. That's pretty fascinating.
Thanks.
Susie, I answered your question in the chat about the samples. I was wondering if you had a specific area you were interested in.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I just was wondering, it's probably a conversation we can follow up with you all. It's just interesting data for us to have and maybe just be aware of in our post-construction monitoring efforts and analysis. We're still collecting, obviously, data for our project. And so it's just interesting data that you might all have that would be useful for us.
Okay. Yeah, just for context, we're doing a couple of different things. One is around the Solana Beach nourishment, trying to track the nourishment going southward and seeing if we can detect changes in the sand sizes. And then
Mhm.
also there's another project where we basically sampled, I think, from the border all the way up to Dana Point, all within like a day or two, I think. And so we have a pretty big data set, a lot of samples that are in the queue to process. And I think we may do another campaign like that again to try and collect all the way across the region and see how things look in the wintertime. But that's what we have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No more questions? Everything was self-explanatory, just the way I like it.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
All right. Good to see everyone.
Thank you all for attending.